Well, the world's ending again, like it does every few years. I thought, why not do a little emotional flooding? Don't try this at home. This was my experiment. Somehow watching this bleak post-nuclear collapse of society story left me feeling less anxious, and I want to talk about it. I'm Micah, licensed therapist, and here we like to talk about horror and mental health. Current circumstances have some people a little anxious right now. Okay, a lot anxious. I have to try not to let it get to me because I'm supporting other people, but it does. So I found out about this movie and thought, why not? I like to psychologically torture myself from time to time. Threads is different than other post-apocalyptic movies. It's very realistic in its presentation. I can't imagine watching this back in the day when it came out. I think it may be a little easier to distance ourselves from it because it is an older movie, but maybe that's just me. I don't know. So let's talk about why this film is terrifying, can be a little traumatizing, and was somehow therapeutic because of its unflinching realism, at least for me. The thing about Threads is it brings horror directly to the people. This is based in Sheffield, England, where we follow two different families during some rising Cold War tension. So this movie begins with normal life and primarily focused on a couple who is planning their lives, essentially, and the woman is pregnant. Knowing what this movie is about makes this very unsettling to see people just going about their normal lives with the news on in the background. And the news is very gradually showing the escalation of turmoil. It feels really real. Like if we turned on the news right now and we're just going about our business, like that would be the beginning of this movie. I think that's what makes it so uncomfortable. So it shows the slow escalation and the panic that begins building amongst the people. We see efforts to prepare, including hoarding behaviors of items, very much like what we saw during the pandemic with the toilet paper. And I personally felt ever increasing anxiety during this first part of the movie. My anxiety was almost at a 10 as the tension developed, and I considered what it would be like to feel so powerless in this situation. So it all climaxes and a nuclear bomb is dropped. I recall one character just kind of staring in disbelief at the mushroom cloud.
Jesus Christ, they've done it.
Because nobody thinks it's going to happen until it does. I watched the bright flash of the nuclear explosion, the subsequent fires and destruction, and I have to say they did a really good job with the practical effects on this one. This was before CGI, so I was super impressed with the disgust and dread that they depicted in the world ending. There was just bodies and gross stuff. Everything was just literally burning. I had to take a brief break at this point, and then when I came back, I felt a shift in my feelings, which is bizarre. The rest of the movie is about examining the aftermath of this, and it's terrible, but it felt different than the beginning half of the movie for me. I think that when I have considered the horror of nuclear attacks, I just dwell on the idea that we would just be gone. Because, if you're close enough to the bomb, you're dust. But I think that I deviated away from thinking about the long-term consequences. I knew they existed, and that it takes years and years and years to recover from something like this in terms of the environment and the people and, whoever survives. But this unflinchingly shows that. So in the aftermath, we see the visceral emotional reactions of the characters. Ruth, who is the girl from the beginning, who is pregnant, in particular, wanders out of her basement where she's staying with family and is around in the aftermath of the explosion. The movie is kind of presented in a documentary way with a little drama thrown into it. And so it very coldly describes the process of radiation sickness. So in between each scene, we have someone just narrating like each terrible thing that happens. We see people dying of radiation sickness, starvation, and how the bodies are just kind of left there because what were you going to do? Everything is destroyed. One part of this I found very chilling is they're putting out radio broadcasts for how to deal with situations, I guess, while the infrastructure is still up. And one of the broadcasts is pretty much like, well, if somebody dies, just like put them in the corner and put a sheet over them. If you're still in this situation 5 days later, you might want to try to drag them outside. And if it's safe, try to bury them, but mark it with their name so that we can try to figure out who it is. Ugh. Again, in cold, sterile presentation, the movie details what would happen at this point. And we see Ruth's struggle to survive and the limitation of those who would support during this time, like the people who would be in charge. We see their ultimate fragility and their own demise because they are people too. We see the reality of the impact on the environment and the nuclear winter, the desperation for food. I have this problem where I'm prone to thinking about how things would smell when I'm watching a movie. I don't know why, but I definitely gave up on that with this movie because it would be real bad. It's literally unimaginable. So out of this desperation, we see the breakdown of social niceties in favor of trying to survive. We see an overrun hospital and medical providers with like no support and supplies to help. Ruth eventually has her baby alone in a barn. I just can't imagine having a baby in that environment. 10 years pass, and Ruth and her daughter, like the others, are working to eat. They're working with nothing to try to grow food. And because of the radiation impact, Ruth dies and leaves her intellectually disabled daughter, because of the radiation, to fend for herself in this hellscape, who herself ends up pregnant. The movie ends with her having this baby and staring at it in horror and disgust. We never see what the baby looks like. It leaves a lot to the imagination. You just never get any feel-good moments with this movie. There's no banding together to survive, really. It's just raw and real and shows people reverting to very primitive behaviors for survival. Eating what they find, turning on one another quickly. It's a lot. I think that this film produces a profound sense of helplessness and existential dread. It forces us to confront our own mortality and the fragility of our civilization. But confrontation of fear can be therapeutic. Gradual exposure can be helpful, especially because horror can reflect real fears, can help us process this anxiety in a controlled environment. And I think that Threads forces us to sit with fear of nuclear war, societal collapse, and even human extinction. But it doesn't offer any catharsis. There's no release, but it does force us to reflect. And reflection is one of the first steps to understanding our fears. And like I said, oddly enough, my feelings upon ending this movie were less afraid. I think I did my own exposure therapy, and my brain was kind of like, okay, then that would suck. But that's not happening right now. So I'm going to enjoy the luxury of life right now, because no amount of preparation is going to help if this happens. It reminded me that we have to deal with things as they come, and ultimately, nothing matters because we're going to die anyway. But I mean that in like a positive way. I don't mean that in a negative way. I think it's more of a nothing matters, so let's enjoy ourselves while we can. I, once again, do not recommend my approach to treating your own end-of-the-world anxiety. See a therapist. And don't watch this movie unless you're weirdo like me and apparently have the opposite effect of what I anticipated would occur. I take zero responsibility for your choices with this, but I warned you.
You cannot win a nuclear war!